Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. I got another Master Duel video for you all today. So, we're going to be talking about the upcoming meta in today's video, and we're going to be doing some predictions on a tier list. It's actually been quite a while. It's definitely been a minute since I've done one of these meta tier lists, as in sorting everything into tiers, because, I mean, let's be frank, there really hasn't been a point to doing content like this lately. It's if I try to do a video like this at any point, I think in the last like month and a half, almost 2 months now, it just would have been like, Tearlaments are the best deck. Well, see ya. Like, that would have been the content of the video. So here with the upcoming ban list changes, new selection pack, and the pre-hits to Bestials, we do actually have a bit to talk about here about how the meta is going to shake out as a result. So let's not waste any time, and let's go ahead and dive straight into it. We have these decks here in no real particular order. I'm going to start with Adamancipator here, as represented by Adamancipator Researcher. So this is a deck that I think has been slightly underrated recently. I say slightly because, like, it's not so underrated that it's like, oh, it's on the level of Tearlaments. No, it's not like quite that underrated, but I do think it's a much more solid pick in this meta than a lot of people might think, or I guess in the last meta, since we're talking about an upcoming meta in this video. But I think a lot of people have this idea that if you're not playing Tearlaments or a deck that can play something to directly counter them, like Dimension Shifter or Necrovalley or something, that the deck's not worth playing. And that's absolutely untrue. Like, we might have been in a tier 0 meta, yes, and there's a chance we'll still be in one. We'll talk about that more when we actually get to Tearlaments here on this list. But I think overall, even in a meta like this, you don't need to be on tier or strictly anti-tier in order to succeed. Now, you should still have a plan for when you're up against Tearlaments, certainly, but that plan does not necessarily have to be something that, again, directly counters them, like Dimension Shifter, Necrovalley, so on and so forth. So that's why I would call Adamancipator a little bit underrated. I think it's honestly like lower tier 2, upper tier 3. I'm gonna stick at the lower end of tier 2 though. I will say that the matchup for Adamancipators in general gets a little bit better with the Ishizu cards getting hit, particularly the Shufflers. There's not as much graveyard hate. That's going to be the case that we'll talk about for a lot of these decks here, the graveyard hate or lack thereof. One of those is actually going to be Branded, as represented by Aliber. Whoops, Aliber, right here, there we go. We'll go ahead and talk about Branded Despia next. So this is a deck that I think more than others is going to be changing fairly dramatically with the upcoming selection pack in particular. It does provide a lot of good support for the Branded archetype, including the Bestials themselves as well, which will definitely not only change how the deck is built and played, but also definitely boost Branded Despia's power level as well, just Branded decks as a whole. I think, honestly, before this was another archetype that was slightly underrated beforehand, just because, like, again, it's not Tearlaments or directly anti-Tearlament, and is also graveyard based and gets hurt by the Shufflers. But between the Shufflers going to one and also Branded Despia getting new relevant support, I'm almost a little tempted to actually put this in tier 1, but I'm going to put it in tier 2, just because I don't think it quite reaches the power level of something else we're going to put in tier 1. God, I wonder where that could be. But I do still think it's going to be an exceptionally strong deck moving into the new format. Again, not only because of the ban list changes, but also because of the new selection pack. Actually, definitely more because of the new selection pack there. So, next, let's talk about Pendulums. It's represented by, geez, if I could stop moving these all over the place, Astrograph Magician. Pendulums have actually been a pretty nice mainstay force in Rogue, even here in the tier 0 meta. I believe we even saw Pendulum sneak a top 16 finish in one of the MCSs. I think it was week 15, actually. But we're going to go ahead and put it in Rogue here. That's pretty much where Pendulum's always been. Endymion, in particular, did creep up to tier 3 for like a minute. That was way back when I think Beyond the Pendulum first came out. But I think ultimately that this archetype here is just going to be in Rogue for the most part. So next up we have Black Wings. I have them represented by Black Winged Dragon, only because it's like the main image I had handy. But yeah, Black Wings. Not a deck we've talked about on a tier list before, but with the new wave of support that they got, very, very much worth talking about now. I will say that if we were not in a tier limit meta, it was just, this is true of so many decks right now. If we were not in a tier limit meta, this deck would have absolutely seen more success, more representation, and would have been higher up on the tier list. I think in a meta without Tearlaments, Blackwings with its new support could have easily been tier 3, and possibly in a crazy world, even the bottom of tier 2. I'm going to put them in Rogue. They're pretty decidedly Rogue, though. Excuse me. I do think that they are upper Rogue. I think they're better than some people do give them credit for as a whole, as a deck. I know a lot of people don't like playing Tax Dragon Turbo with the Blackwinged Assault Dragon, but that is, I think, the best way to play the deck, and I think that variant is exceptionally strong. Other variants are as well, but yeah, the Blackwing deck, again, just because of the meta that we're in and the deck that's relevant and prominent, is definitely going to be decidedly Rogue here. Next, let's talk about Sword Soul Tenyi. Oh, Sword Soul, how the mighty have fallen. I say this every time we talk about Sword Soul lately, just because it's sad. This deck was tier 1 for so long, and it hasn't even really lost anything. It's just getting power crept out of the format, which it's always sad to see a deck go for that reason. It's like, when a deck has to leave the meta more or less, or get knocked down in power level because of hits, that's like, that's an accomplishment. But when it just kind of naturally phase out, it definitely feels more bad. But yeah, Sword Soul was once a mainstay of tier 1, is now looking to be a mainstay of tier 3. Definitely not a bad deck by any means. Definitely can't stress that enough for any deck you're going to see on this list. Even if it's at the bottom of Rogue, it is still more than capable of hitting Diamond 1. So all of these decks are definitely good in their own right. Sword Soul has definitely taken a harsh fall from grace there. Let's talk about Mathmex. Mathmex Circular is representing Mathmex here. This is a deck that I was actually a little bit pessimistic about beforehand moving into this meta, because I knew that Bestials were rumored to be just around the corner, and yeah, with the Bestials that are very splashable when they're at 3, decks that rely on light and dark monsters being in the graveyard tend to falter pretty hard, and Mathmech is definitely one of those. We already saw that when the Ishizu cards entered the meta, even before Tearlaments. Like, as soon as the Shufflers hit Master Duel, Mathmech just dropped off the face of the earth. It just did not become nearly as viable as it once was. With all of the Shufflers, all 2 of them, with all 2 of the Shufflers at 1, as well as the 2 most prominent Bestial cards, I'm definitely feeling a lot more optimistic about Mathmech. I'm going to put it in tier 3, a little bit above Sword Soul. I think it's about on par with Sword Soul, though, in terms of its power level. I could even see a world where this can creep up to tier 2. Just because, again, all these cards that in the TCG and OCG kind of pushed Mathmech out of the format, not even due to power creep, but just due to naturally countering the deck, are all limited here in Master Duel. So I think Mathmech definitely has much more of a fighting chance than it did in the past. Alright, now I have Deer Note here to represent Punk variants in general, be it pure Punk or any deck that utilizes a Punk engine, which I think we might be seeing more of here in Master Duel than we did in the OCG. So I'm thinking particularly of course I'm thinking about Assault Synchron because I love that card. I'm always thinking about it. I'm thinking particularly of like Assault Synchron based decks. In the OCG, there were some decks that saw some success that utilized Assault Synchron and the Bestials and a Sprite package as well. And that's kind of what I loosely based off the Punk Sprite deck. But I utilized Punk as a Synchro engine because obviously we didn't have Bestials yet. Had Magma Hut and Juraswarm both been at 3, I would have completely ousted Punk from those builds and just replaced them with Bestial cards, I think. But with those cards coming in at 1, that's definitely going to be a tougher sell to just do that. So I do think that Punk has a bit more of a place than it might have otherwise here in this meta. It's definitely still decidedly Rogue, though. I'll put it here. I think it's about on par with Pendulum Magicians, and so much of me wants to be like, well, if you play Punk Sprite, that's actually more like tier 2, but no, that's definitely the bias side of me. If I'm going to be just firm and objective about it, Punk and its variants are definitely decidedly Rogue. But hey, again, Rogue decks can absolutely see success with those in this meta, or even in the tier 0 meta as well. Alright, let's talk about Fluandereeze next. Fluandereeze, poor flows. And I know a lot of people are like, poor flows. Like, a lot of people don't like to play against Fluandereeze, and I understand that. I definitely think they're annoying, but You know, even I have to acknowledge when a deck I don't like playing against gets treated far too harshly by the ban list, and that's definitely been the case for Flandres. Not the case with Barrier Statue, that absolutely needed to go, but losing 2 copies of Prosperity and then losing 2 copies of Map, and now they've lost a Terraforming as well. I know the Terraforming was largely because of Tearlaments, but it is definitely just a Flandres hit as well. Flandres has managed to persevere, though, and even despite losing everything aside from Terraforming beforehand, still was a Tier 2 standalone, I was going to say, I don't know why, staple. I think it's going to continue to be the case. I'll put Flow at the bottom of Tier 2, but I don't think losing Terraforming makes the deck significantly worse. I think it's still definitely going to be a Tier 2 house, and will definitely still be around. You'll still be seeing Flandres. You'll just be seeing Map a little bit less often. Alright, now Stun. Good old Stun. I mean, quote-unquote good old Stun. A lot of people were not particularly huge fans of Stun decks, and to be honest, I'm kind of one of them. For those who don't know, somehow, what Stun means, I have that represented by Fossil Dyna here. Even if you don't know it by name, I'm sure you've encountered this deck at least once before. It's those decks that'll play like Inspector Border, Fossil Dyna, Banisher of the Radiance. They'll throw on a Moon Mirror Shield onto them, and then play a bunch of floodgates like Necro Valley, Skill Drain, Rivalry. There can be only one, so on and so forth. So again, I think you're all pretty familiar with the deck. Oh, and then of course in this meta, they're all also playing D-Fissure and Macro as well. These decks, though, have always been Rogue and will always continue to be Rogue. You know, they'll be able to sneak in and win some games here and there, but I think ultimately, yeah, definitely going to be decidedly Rogue. Now let's talk about Goaty a little bit. Goaty was one of the new archetypes most recently introduced and has quickly become something of a fan favorite. A lot of people really like this deck. I'm actually one of them. I think the playstyle is neat. I think the aesthetic is very, very cool. I've not built Goaties, though, just because even though I do think they are neat, I just don't think they're particularly good. Again, like anything else on this list, definitely capable of having success and hitting Diamond 1 with the right dedicated and or skilled enough pilot. But I do think the deck is decidedly Rogue. I think it's, again, it's about on par with, like, Pendulum Magician, maybe Punk, I don't know. It's definitely lower Rogue, though, compared to everything else that's going to be on this tier list. I would definitely say that's the case. Alright, now we're going to talk about Sprites a little bit. Ooh, Sprites. Sprite Blue just went to 2, which, frankly, I'm not a huge fan of. It's definitely a consistency hit that the deck is going to notice, but I don't think it's one that's going to end up like costing it games in the long term. It feels very comparable to the branded hits we saw a little while ago, right when Aliber went to 2. Because before that we had branded opening going to 2. That's somewhat similar to Sprite Starter going to 2. And then now we have Blue going to 2, kind of like Aliber did. So I think it'll have overall the same impact where the deck gets a little less consistent, but overall is not like majorly affected by it. I'm going to put it in tier 2 still, below branded. I think that's about where the deck is now. I think honestly for the most part, a lot of these decks are going to land like in the upcoming meta where they were in the past one, with some exceptions like, you know, again, Mathmech here in particular, I think does get a boost from the Bystials and the Ishizu cards getting hit. Now that I'm looking at tier 2 here, I think I am actually going to put Adamancipator in tier 3, just because I don't think it is quite as good as Flandres or Sprite, but it is close. It's very, very close. I would say Adamancipator is like borderline between tiers 2 and 3. If I wanted to make a tier 2.5, I'm not a fan of 0.5 tiers. They feel really pointless. But if I were going to do that, I would call Adamancipator a tier 2.5 deck. So in talking about Mathmech, which is greatly boosted by the Shufflers going to 1, Runic, as much as a lot of people probably do not want to hear this, Runic actually does get a nice power boost from the Ishizu Shufflers going to 1. Much like Mathmech, this archetype is kind of centered around having 3 cards in your graveyard, so having everybody play a card that shuffles 3 cards from your graveyard back into your deck was obviously a huge blow to Runic. They were decidedly Rogue before. This is another one where I'm like borderline. Like, I want to put this at either the top of Rogue or the bottom of tier 3. I'm going to put this at the bottom of tier 3. I'm thinking mostly that Naturia Runic is going to be the variant that will be at the bottom of tier 3. Literally every other variant of Runic, including Stun, those are all decidedly rogue. But the Naturia variant in particular, with the Ishizu Shufflers at 1, might actually see enough success to be, breaking out of the rogue category and seeing like tier 3 levels of play. Again, I know a lot of you probably don't want to hear that. Runic is definitely by far the most hated archetype in all of Master Duel, but it is what it is. That's just what's going to likely end up shaking down. All right, now we have Kikalos. Let's talk about Tearlaments. So, I think the big question that a lot of people are probably asking, both me and yourselves, is: are we still in a tier 0 meta post ban list and with the new selection pack coming out? I think it's close. I think it's close to say whether we're in a tier 0 meta. It's going to really, to be fair, tiers in general are always subjective. But I think in this case in particular, it's going to be very subjective whether or not you think we're still in a tier 0 meta. Well, let's just first decidedly put Tearlaments up here. I do think that Tearlaments are still a decent bit above pretty much every other deck in this current iteration. I could be wrong about that. Perhaps the Ishizu cards, Kalbeck aside, which is at 2, all the other ones being at 1, alongside the Bestials being at 1. That might be enough of a consistency hit to not make it tier 0, but there's no way the deck is not still the best deck moving forward. I would expect that to be the case until they likely receive more major hits on the ban list next month. When the Tearlament pack rotates out. So, again, if you define tier 0 as the best deck being significantly, without putting a specific numeric value on it, significantly ahead of tier 2, then yes, we are still in a tier 0 meta. But if you strictly go by needs representation of whatever number, 60, 65, 55, everybody says something different, then we might see Tearlament fall below those criterias, which would make them tier 1 and not tier quote-unquote 0. But I would generally consider them still to be just about the only tier 1 deck, the only deck of its power level. I did mention before that maybe Branded Despia with its new support might also hit tier 1. But I still think even with that, they won't be, honestly, frankly, even close to the power level of Tearlaments. So, the real question I think people mean when they're asking, are we still in a tier 0 meta, is Tearlaments still far and away the best deck? I suspect the answer is yes, but the gap will get more narrow. So, that's pretty much where I'm at with that. Alright, let's see. A few more archetypes to go here. Labyrinth. I say this every time I put Labyrinth on a tier list. It's been rogue, and until they get their new support, it's going to continue to be rogue. Was really surprised, honestly, that Lovely Lady and Big Welcome were not in this latest selection pack. When those cards do drop, Labyrinth gets a huge boost in power. It's going to largely depend on what the rest of the meta looks like as far as where exactly it'll land, but it'll definitely be out of rogue. I suspect it'll either be tier 2 or 3. Again, depending on what the meta shapes up to be when those new support cards get dropped. Alright, Exo Sisters is the deck we're going to talk about next. A lot of people kind of lump this together with Flaunderies, for good reason. In the tier 0 meta, it's the other kind of go-to deck that straight up counters Tearlaments. But even with all the hits to Flaunderies, in my experience playing against both Flo and Exo Sister, Flo definitely seems to be the more threatening deck of the two. They are still very comparable in terms of how they counter Tearlaments and also their power level, but I think they are significant enough of a difference that I'm actually going to put Exo Sister at the top of tier 3, and I'll leave Flo at the bottom of tier 2. Again, the two decks are close, but I do think that Flo is notably better than Exo Sister. Alright, so here I have Naturia Beast, just to kind of talk about Naturia variants. I already touched on that with Runic, so I'm not going to be talking about Naturia Runic. I'm more talking about like Naturia Vernusilv, kind of more synchro builds. Which I personally think is a lot more fun than Naturia Runic, but those builds did actually receive a bit of a hit on this most recent ban list. A lot of them use the Ishizu cards, so they lost those, but I'm really thinking more of the Braver package. Now, to be fair, not every Shizu, or I'm sorry, Naturia Varied Yourself deck was even playing the Braver package. I think I was in the minority of decks that were, but that is still a pretty decent Earth extra deck option that the deck is losing. The deck also did not have a difficult time making level 9 synchros either, so yeah, I do think that will be a notable loss for Naturia Varied Yourself and non-Runic Naturia variants in general. I don't think, though, that moves them significantly from where they are on the tier list right now, which is lower Rogue, I would say. Pretty comparable to stuff like Pendulum, Lab, Goaty, all that fun stuff. Numeron is interesting, right? I've noticed more Numeron lately. I think that might be a bit subjective. That might be my own personal bias / experience. But to be fair, I've also noticed more Numeron being submitted to Master Duel meta lately as well. I think that might be due to people just kind of like not really wanting to play Tearlaments, not wanting to invest a whole lot in a deck, still have the Numeron core. It's easy, you can just fire it up, go second and have a decent shot of winning. That said, I'm going to put Numeron at like the bottom of Rogue next to Stun. I think Numeron and Stun are pretty comparable in a lot of ways, not just how disliked they are, but also like the role and the place they have in a meta and the spot they often end up on, which is, again, the bottom of Rogue. But, again, still decks you could experience success with if you were inclined to play them. Sky Striker is going to be our next topic of discussion here. I was a little bit pessimistic when I heard Bystials were coming, but yet again, with Magma Hut and Druiswarm coming in at 1, I don't think Sky Striker eats quite as much of those banishes as they would have once. Had as they would have in the meta, had those cards not been limited to 1. So, yeah, definitely still a far ways off from where they were when Linkage first came out. At that point, they were like tier 2, but now they're definitely still Rogue. It's really weird, right? Because Sky Striker is one of those decks that, like, I don't really know where to place just because, like, nobody plays this deck anymore, so I don't actually know how strong it is. I suspect it's probably about on par with Lab in terms of its power level, so I'll just drop it right there. Dinomorphia, I think, is another deck that's pretty comparable to Lab, not only in how it plays, but also in terms of its power level. Just going to drop it right here on Rogue. Again, when Rexstorm first came out, about the same time Linkage did, we actually saw Dinomorphia in Tier 3, kind of bursting into Tier 2, but yeah, the meta has definitely moved on since then, and Dinomorphia, while fine as a deck, is definitely decidedly Rogue. Oh, Dragon Link. Poor Dragon Link. This deck was poised to have some success with the announcement of Bystials, but then we saw Magma Hut and Druiswarm get limited, and it's definitely looking rough for Dragon Link. Those were going to be the 2 cards that were going to swoop in and take the deck out of obscurity, and honestly, had they come in at even 2, probably back into Tier 3. I mean, the Bystials overall will still provide some decent support for Dragon Link, but I cannot imagine this deck breaking out of Rogue in this meta, which again is sad. I really like Dragon Link. I think it's a really cool deck. And again, had we actually gotten at least 2 of each of Magma Hut and Druiswarm, I think would have absolutely made more of an impact on this meta. But with those cards coming in at 1 each, I think it's going to be a much more difficult sell for the Dragon Link deck there. Okay, Salamandrates. I don't really know what to say about this deck. Couldn't even tell you the last time I played against it outside of like an event. It's Rogue, where it's been for quite a while. I'll put it next to Goaty. I think it's about on that power level where it's not bad, but I just don't find the deck and what it does right now to be particularly impressive, to be frank. All right, a couple more decks to take a look at. Heroes. So Hero is a deck that I've not talked a lot about in the Tier 0 meta. But it's actually not a bad pick at all right now, mostly for its ease of going into Dark Law, which is, of course, a decidedly powerful Tearlament counter there. The deck is... I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, the deck is arguably still Rogue, but I'm going to put it in Tier 3. I'm just trying to think about where it's going to be moving forward, honestly. I mean, Tearlament's still going to be far and away the best deck, so I still think it'll see some more play than it normally does in that regard. I'll put it in Tier 3. It's not quite the bottom of Tier 3. I do think it's, like, better than Runic, just not quite as good as stuff like Sword Soul and Mathmech, but definitely not a bad pick in this meta at all. And not just my opinion, we've actually seen some decent results on both ladder and tournaments for Heroes, enough to put them in Tier 3. And finally, Madolches. Madolches I definitely think were underrated in this past meta as a Tearlaments counter. I think most of the reason they were underrepresented, though, is just because the deck has like so many archetype-specific URs. I think if you haven't like crafted any, you need like 7 Madolche URs for the extra deck altogether. So it's definitely a bit of an ask to excuse me. That's definitely a bit of an ask to craft such a cute, sweet deck, but I'll put it right here. I think it's about on par with, again, Lab and all that stuff moving forward into the next meta. So that is going to go ahead and do it. That's the whole tier list done. It's funny, I actually had to remake this video because I recorded this whole video, rendered it, edited it, and uploaded it, and then like literally 2 hours later, Bestials were confirmed to drop in Master Duel. It's like, oh, cool. Okay, so that entire analysis I did beforehand was mostly irrelevant, is what I thought, but now actually looking at where I put everything on the tier list, it's actually not different than where I had it before I knew Bestials were coming out. So, and I do think that is, again, largely indicative of the fact that Magma Hut and Druid Swarm are coming in at 1 copy each. I don't expect them to have as big of an impact on the meta as they might have otherwise. So this is where I think things are going to end up once the ban list rotates and the new selection pack comes in. Definitely don't be afraid to let me know what you think in the comments below, whether you agree or disagree. You know, I've been telling you what I think the meta is going to be like for the past almost half an hour now, so definitely don't be afraid to share your thoughts down there in the comment section below. But that's going to go ahead and do it for this video. Let's move now to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack. You'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation, you do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now, so without further ado, this is Xlex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.